Hey everyone, welcome to this week's Pioneer tier list. Before we jump in, be sure to like and subscribe. It's free and it helps the channel out a ton. Let's dive right in with the D tier. These are the decks that show up occasionally and are strong enough in a vacuum, but don't stand up to the metagame at large. First up, we have Dimir Control. This deck has been capturing my attention lately, especially with the Days Undoing combo alongside Narset, Parter of Veils. With the continued success of Rakdos, Dimir is the control deck I reach for to beat up on this powerful mid-range strategy. Next up, we have Izzet Creativity. While this deck does a great job against Rakdos and Mono Green Karn, it struggles into many of the other decks in the format, including Mono White Humans and any counterspell-based deck. Continuing on, we have Green White Auras. This deck found legs at the regional championship in Atlanta and has continued showing up since. The printing of Audacity and Brushland have helped establish this deck as the best Auras deck, and it's very impressive when facing a lack of interaction. Next up is a spicy one. We have Green White Yorion. This deck is an impressive toolbox deck that leverages the immense flexibility of green-white creatures at grinding in the mid to late game and disrupting opposing strategies. Last up for D tier, we have 5-color Enigmatic. This toolbox deck has a wonderful time beating up slower decks like Rakdos Midrange and Blue-White Control, but even so, the slow starting speed makes this deck weak to Lotus Field combo, Mono Green Karn, and Mono White Humans. Now, let's jump right to the S tier. These are the decks that define the metagame and require respect for opposing main decks or sideboards. Our S tier deck for this week is no surprise as it continues to pace the field, and that's Rakdos Midrange. This deck continues putting up top finishes every week, and despite being targeted, stands as the best deck in Pioneer. With over 40% of the challenge top 16s from this weekend, Rakdos is the undisputed top deck of Pioneer right now. Next up, we move to the A tier, and these decks are great into an open metagame, but can be exploited under the right circumstances. First off, we have Mono White Humans. Pioneer's de facto aggro deck gets to leverage the power of early aggression backed up by disruption in the form of Thalia, Guardian of Thraben, and Brave the Elements. With good matchups into Lotus Field and Mono Green Karn, it's no surprise this deck continues to do well. Skilled pilots find a way to fight through the Rakdos and Izzet matchups with powerful sideboard cards like Extraction Specialist and Wedding Announcement, but those matchups are concerning and why this deck never seems to quite crest into S tier. Last up, we have the newest addition to A tier, Mono Green Karn. While this deck was dominating the metagame a few weeks ago, Rakdos has started pulling away in terms of success as green has been targeted by Izzet Phoenix, Mono White Humans, and decks playing extra Pithing Needles in the sideboard. The deck is still incredibly powerful, but it's lost a step in the past few weeks. Next up, we move to the B tier, and these are the last of the top decks everyone needs to highly respect when looking at their local RCQs or Magic Online events. We start with Lotus Field. This deck has been rising through the ranks thanks to its good matchup into Izzet Phoenix, Rakdos Midrange, and Blue-White Control, as well as any deck that can't interact with their game plan in the early game. Next up, we have Izzet Phoenix. This deck continues to impress and only moves back to B tier thanks to the massive rise in popularity of Rakdos Midrange, along with the resurgence of Lotus Field combo. If Rakdos and Lotus Field are sitting near the top of the field, it makes it tough for Izzet to thrive. Continuing on, we have Blue-White Control. This deck continues to succeed despite having very few strong matchups in the top tables, thanks to a strong ability to beat most of the other decks in the format. Although you're not thrilled to run into Rakdos, Mono Green Karn, Lotus Field, or Izzet Phoenix, most other decks are great matchups and you make up a lot of percentage points versus the field. Strong pilots continue to show up with this deck, and while I'm skeptical about its place in the metagame, B tier seems like a lovely home for this gatekeeper deck that separates the top of the metagame from the rest. Last up in B tier, we have Gruul Vehicles. This deck finds continued success thanks to a strong Rakdos midrange matchup and a good matchup into the various aggro and tempo decks of the format. While some control decks can take over the mid to late game if you don't find your early acceleration, this deck has impressed with the addition of Werewolf Pack Leader to help crew your vehicles and keep your hand full. Finally, we move on to the C tier. These are the metagame decks that are looking to target a specific slice of the metagame, even if that means they may be weak against the overall top tables. These are still more than powerful enough to take down a local event, but they are weak choices into large-scale open field events. First up, we have Mono Blue Spirits. This deck does a fantastic job of punishing some of the newer top decks like Lotus Field and Blue White Control, while maintaining a fantastic matchup against Mono Green Karn. Where Spirits struggle is against Rakdos, Phoenix, and even Green White Angels, as these decks can put blockers in the way or keep the skies clear. This is a deck that rewards reps and finding the small edges, so aggro tempo centric players can often find wins out of nowhere with this deck. Next up, we have Green White Angels. This deck continues to impress with the addition of Kayla's Reconstruction, and it manages to deal with Rakdos and Izzet with much more frequency thanks to doubling the number of large spells in the deck. While you can still easily fall behind and lose to those decks and Mono Green Karn, once you start finding your footing, most decks have a tough time breaking up your synergies and getting through 30 plus life. Last up, we have Abzan Greasefang. This deck continues to have high highs when it can combo out a Parhelion on turn 3, especially with Disruption on turn 1, but the average hands for this deck, especially when confronted with any disruption, continue to be unimpressive and is a big reason the deck is perpetually stuck between B and D tier. There you have it. That's this week's tier list. Be sure to let me know what you think about these tiers and the decks within them in the comments down below, and thanks for watching. Until next time.